that trip, our wonderful guide was Hisham. And so we got well acquainted with him and watched how knowledgeable he was, and it was just great. Hisham was born in Cairo and has been living there ever since. He has been educated at the University of Cairo. He's a historian and an Egyptologist. He's been doing lectures in England as well as in Egypt and now in the United States. We brought him to visit us all. And Hisham, love to have you here. And sorry,
thank you.
We have a lot of competition. Yes. So I'm going to sit back.
Right. Once again, good evening, everyone, and I'm really glad to be here. I know that maybe not a big crowd today, but I understand that there is a bit of competition in the city at the moment. I'm really honored to be able to talk to you about different things concerning my country. I mean, I'm in love with this country, and I don't know what can I do to help the country and to increase the number of tourists coming. And we are doing great actually in Egypt at the moment. So I hope that what I'm doing here might give a very good idea about Egypt, and it will encourage you and help you to understand about the country, and maybe encourages you to come and visit us one day. We discussed yesterday art in ancient Egypt. Today we are going to talk about the evolution of construction, how construction was developed year after year and generation after generation. Again, we have to understand that the main concept in ancient Egypt was the second life. The second life was the base of everything in ancient Egypt, because they realized that this life is short and will come to an end sooner or later. So they need to prepare themselves for the afterlife, which will be eternal life. So life started in Egypt, maybe much earlier than we can even think, because in a place called El-Fayoum, which is like a little oasis about an hour drive south of Cairo, we found some little tools used by the early Egyptians in the Nile Valley for hunting. And these are some pictures of the hunting tools they used about like 1 million years ago. So 1 million years ago, yeah. This picture actually is for some of the tools, and it is displayed in England, in Oxford, in Ashmolean Museum. It's not in Egypt, that's in Ashmolean Museum. And you can see actually the time, it's like between 1 million and 10,000 BC. So this is kind of the period of time when the Egyptians, or the people who lived in Egypt, were very much like Bedouins. They were traveling all around. They were looking for water, they were looking for food, they were fighting for survival, and they used to live in caves, which is, as we talked yesterday about cavemen in different parts of Egypt. Egypt is mainly desert, so what happened within this period, that the Great River Nile started running from south to north, coming from Lake Victoria in Uganda, in East Africa, covering all the distance, which is about more than 4,000 miles, all the way down to the Mediterranean. So all of a sudden, those who lived in Egypt at that time, they realized that they have now a current supply of water. There is no need to travel and look for water or look for food or whatever. No, they can actually have the current supply of water when the Nile comes in a great inundation every year on the second half of July, flooding the banks. As you can see some pictures here showing that even the area which is by the pyramids of Giza used to be flooded. And this is not an old one actually, that's not painting, that's a picture. Yeah, that's a picture taken, we're talking about 19th century. Many of the pictures were taken by the early European travelers to Egypt during the second half of the 19th century and early 20th century, before building the dams. The dams were built on the Nile in the 20th century. The earliest one was built in 1904, which is the Aswan Dam, and then later they built the High Dam in 1960s. So even an area like the desert of Giza, where the pyramids are, and these are the two statues, or the two closest statues of Memnon, which is located on the west bank of the city of Luxor, the west bank of the Nile of Luxor, and it's desert. Maybe one day we'll go there and see it. It's just in the middle of desert. And you can see that even an area like this used to be flooded when the Nile comes and it creates an inundation, which was the main irrigation season. And by the way, the day when the Nile comes and it creates an inundation was the beginning of the Egyptian calendar. Yeah, and the calendar had like 3 seasons, each one of 4 months. So the first season was the inundation season, which is also irrigation season, and then planting season, and then harvest. So everything is related to the river Nile. So they realize now that they have current supply of water, they have a wonderful life, they can live by the Nile and the banks of the river, and they can learn the first lesson of stability, which is agriculture. Yeah, because now they are not traveling, they can be based somewhere, they can grow crops, and so they don't have to depend on hunting. No, they can also become farmers. And that was the beginning of farming in Egypt. We're talking about like 10,000 BC. That was even before Egypt was united, because Egypt was divided into upper and lower, and I will show you this on the map later on. But anyway, even before Egypt was united, they started agriculture, and that helped a lot in building small communities like little villages. And this is a picture of one of the villages. It's not that old, but it's old enough. I mean, it's not like 10,000 years old, it's like 3,500 years old. This is the only example we can have actually from a village, because the problem is when they were building things for their first life, they didn't want to waste time building things of stone or whatever for this life, and they know that sooner or later they will die and leave it behind. So they focused on building things for the afterlife of stone. But for their houses, even the palaces of the pharaohs were built of mud bricks and wood. Mud bricks and wood, and you can see here layouts of one of the villages. That's the village of El.Meniawy, which is also on the west bank of the Nile in Luxor, which is the workman's village. That's like a close-up look of the village, and you can see the design of the houses, like very small houses, very narrow streets and so on, like living all together like in a very closed community to protect themselves, because it's like almost by the edge of the Nile Valley and near the desert, so they need to be well protected. So that's if we talk about the daily life buildings, houses, palaces of the pharaohs were all built of mud brick and wood. While when they thought of the afterlife, they had to believe and think also of super creatures, what we call gods or deities, and they believed in them to protect them in their first life and to guide them into the afterlife. So to worship gods, they had to build houses for those gods, the houses of the gods, what we call now temples. And because they believed in the afterlife, they need to keep the body intact for the afterlife. They need to store all the equipments they might need for the afterlife intact, jewelry, name it, everything. So they built tombs, or the houses of eternity. So the tombs were called the houses of eternity. So they built them because they meant to last forever, until the afterlife, and they didn't know how long they will need these buildings for, so they built them of stone. So this is how the idea was developed in their mind, building houses of the gods, houses of eternity of stone, building their daily life houses and villages of mud brick. And Egypt had enough and sufficient amount of mountains, providing different kinds of stone, mainly limestone, and second priority was sandstone, because it's not as good quality as the limestone. But if the limestone is not available in the area where they were building, so they go for sandstone. Mainly in the north or in lower Egypt, they were using limestone, like building the pyramids of limestone, the tombs of Saqqara of limestone. But when we go further south, like near Luxor and even south of Luxor, they were using mainly sandstone, which is available. They were very practical. They didn't have to travel a long way to get the stone. They were looking for what's available in the area, and they were using it for building their tombs or their temples. This is an example of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And here you can see a great map of Africa, and you can see the sources of the River Nile coming from here. That's Lake Victoria in Uganda, and going all the way down to the Mediterranean. By the way, this is an artificial lake. This one here, the Lake Nasser. It's south of Aswan, and that's created after building the high dam. The Lake Nasser is the largest artificial lake in Africa and used to be in the world until China managed to build a bigger dam than the high dam only a couple of years ago. And obviously the artificial lake of the Chinese dam is bigger than this one. But this one is stretching, as you can see, between Egypt and the Sudan, 350 kilometers in Egypt, 150 in the Sudan, to be the most famous lake in Africa, artificial lake, and the biggest reservoir of water for Egypt. Here we can have just a map of Egypt, and it shows the Lake Nasser. That's Aswan, where from they got the granite and transporting it all the way down the Nile. Here is like a view of the Western Desert. As you can see, just desert, but little oases here and there, these green spots. We have no oasis on the Eastern Desert because it's mainly Rocky Mountains, and it's like the extension of the Red Sea mountain range. So between the Nile Valley and the Red Sea are just mountains, and not mountains like here, not green mountains. They are very yellow, and it's just rocks and desert. Not even possible to live on the East Bank. They could live on the West Bank because it's almost flat, and there is, as you can see, some sources of water. So the green snake, I would use this terminology like a snake river. That green snake was the Nile Valley, and this is where they started settling down and started their civilization by the river. When they thought of the afterlife and they wanted to protect their bodies or their mummies, when I say bodies, I mean mummies, because mummification was invented to make the body dry, so it make it last forever, or at least for a long time. And they need to protect those mummies and the treasures as well. So they built their tombs. They were very primitive tombs, and the tombs were built of mud brick and wood at the beginning. We're talking about like 3000 BC, at the beginning of the Egyptian civilization. Why I'm calling 3000 BC the beginning of the Egyptian civilization? It's actually, to be more precise, the beginning of the written history of Egypt, the beginning of the pharaonic history of Egypt. Yeah, when Egypt was united, the north and the south, upper and lower, became one country, and the king who was sitting upon the throne was known later as a pharaoh, and the word pharaoh is driven from the word bir'u, Pharaoh, Pharaon, Pharaoh. Bir'u means the one who lives in the big house, if we translate it exactly from ancient language to English. So it's the one who lives in the big house. Indication he's the ruler, he's the richest person in the country. And the pharaohs ruled Egypt from 3000 BC until the Greeks arrived with Alexander the Great, 331 BC. Yeah, so that's what we call pharaonic Egypt. Later we call it Greco-Roman Egypt. Right. So at the beginning of the written history, because we call it the written history because that's the time when the language was established, the hieroglyphics as a language was established or constructed and started to be used to describe their first life, their daily activities, and their beliefs of the afterlife, God's rituals, and all these things were written either on papyrus or carved on the walls of tombs and temples and so on. This is where from we learn about ancient Egypt. So they used to bury the dead underground, which is quite normal, common. Yeah. So they used to dig a shaft, and at the bottom of the shaft was about 15 to 17 meters, about like 45 to 50 feet deep. And at the bottom of the shaft is a very primitive burial chamber where they lay down the body or the mummy in the form of a fetus to be ready for the rebirth for the afterlife. Okay. And it's not safe because the shaft is opened, so they had to cover the shaft somehow. And they built something like a big step or a big bench above ground to hide the entrance to the shaft. Is what we call mastaba. Yeah, this is mastaba. We'll be using this terminology a lot in the coming part of our session. Mastaba is an Arabic word, and this is a mastaba, which is like a little sofa. Yeah, the villagers can sleep on it or sit on it at home, and the locals in Egypt were calling those buildings mastaba. So the early travelers to Egypt, when they came to Egypt, and they didn't know what are these, so they were described by the locals. Those are mastabas, because it looks very much like the step or a bench that they have at home. So the word was taken from the locals and was used to describe the early buildings of tombs in Egypt, which was built of mud brick and wood. Okay, that was again 3000 BC. It's a colored plan of the mastaba, as you can see, and some of them were like family tombs, so they had like 2 burial chambers and had like 2 shafts, as you can see. Not until 2700 BC, when King Zoser came to the throne about 2700 BC, and he was a very famous and very special king. He hired and employed and assigned one of the most genius architects of the history of mankind. His name was Imhotep. Wanted to build something very special for his pharaoh. Show off his work, show his intelligence, and also show his respect to the pharaoh and to make him different from the other kings before. Okay? From 3000 BC until 2700 BC, the tombs of the pharaohs were built in Upper Egypt, in the south, in a place called Al-Qom Al-Ahmar. This one, here. It's no, you see Luxor, that's the Valley of the Kings. So this is where they built the early tombs, yeah, of the kings from 3000 BC until 2700 BC. Egypt was divided into 2 halves. I think I have the map here. Right? We can imagine this line here, and this part will be Lower Egypt, the north, and that's Upper Egypt. When Egypt was reunited, the king of Upper Egypt invaded the north. So the first king of the United Kingdom of Upper and Lower Egypt was Upper Egyptian originally. So all his followers, for the first 2 pharaonic families, they were building their tombs. They lived in Memphis, but they built their tombs in Al-Qom Al-Ahmar. Not until King Zoser came to the throne and he decided to build his tomb in Saqqara, which is part of Greater Cairo, yeah, near El Giza here. And Saqqara was 3 miles to the west of the city of Memphis, which was the capital of Egypt. Well, Something very important we need to know about building in ancient Egypt. They were inspired by the sunrise and the sunset. They were great observers. They were sitting and watching. They were respecting everything in this life. Respected the river Nile and tried to explain that magnificent phenomena, how the Nile comes in a great inundation every year, and they believe that the Nile god is using the key of life, which is the key of the Nile, and opening the gates of the river Nile to let the Nile comes in a great inundation and giving them life. That's why they call the key of the Nile the key of life, which is the Ankh. Yeah, all right. They also noticed that every morning there is a sunrise. The sun rises on east, and they could see it traveling from east to west, and then it sets behind the mountains of the West Bank, disappears, gets dark, nighttime, didn't know where did it go. And then the following morning, the sun is born again. Strange. So they thought about it. They said, this is life and death. So the sunrise is life and the sunset is death. It is exactly what will happen to us when we die. When we die, we'll be traveling in the underworld until we reach the east, and then we'll be born again for the afterlife, and we'll be traveling from east to west. So they use the east bank of the river Nile for living. So they built their towns, their cities, everything on the east bank, while on the west bank was the side of the dead, where they built their tombs and their mortuary temples. But when the first king of Egypt invaded the north and built the city of Memphis, he was obliged to build the city of Memphis, the very first capital of Egypt, on the west bank. And why is that? Because he couldn't trust the north. He couldn't trust the people on the north. They're still enemies. Yeah. So he built the city of Memphis on the west bank, which is very well protected. From the east is the river Nile. From the west is the vast desert, and it's very difficult to invade from the desert. From the south are the supporters, the southern people, and he can only protect and defeat the enemies might come from the north. Yeah, so the city was very well protected, and it was a very strategic location. It's an exception. It is an exception, the city of Memphis. So when they built the necropolis of Saqqara, should be on the west bank, so it was only 3 miles to the west of Memphis. Okay? So Imhotep, the genius architect, thought about building something special for his king, and that special thing became later on known as the step pyramid, or to be more precise, we call it the step mastaba. You remember the mastaba? So it's a step mastaba because it's not a pyramid yet. How? I'll explain that right now. That's the plan of the whole complex of King Zoser, the step pyramid. We'll come to talk about it in details, but just to give you an idea about the location. All right, back to our lovely mastabas. That's the mastaba here. That's the original mastaba. Yeah. After he built the mastaba, as usual, the only thing different was 3 things actually, different from the earlier tombs. Number 1, the size of the mastaba was much bigger than the size of the earlier mastabas. It was like 10 meters high. Number 2, the shaft underneath was much deeper than before. It was 27 meters, not 17. Number 3, which is the most important of all, was the material used was not mud brick, was the first time in the history of mankind using stone, limestone, for the very first time to use stone in building that massive building of Saqqara. Okay, so he built the mastaba, and he surrounded the whole area by an enclosure wall. okay, enclosing the whole area of the step pyramid. And it was 10 meters high. The early Greek travelers to Egypt described the complex of King Zoser built by Imhotep in Saqqara to have a great wall surrounding it, and the wall had 14 doors. 14 doors. But very strange, they said that 13 out of the 14 doors were false doors. The only real entrance was this one. A little entrance, as you can see, very narrow entrance, because not everyone was welcomed to the complex. Why they had 14 doors then? 14 doors to be exactly the same number and the same look like the palace of the Pharaoh in Memphis. But if they needed 14 doors for the palace, which is used on daily basis, they wouldn't need the same number of doors for the palace of the afterlife. But here they need to have more control on the people coming in and out. So it was a very small, narrow entrance, as you can see. Right? So after he finished, we are trying to read his mind. Imhotep, that genius architect, he went outside the complex, but he couldn't see his work. The mastaba is hidden behind the wall. Yeah? That wall is almost 10 meters high. So it's as high as the mastaba. So it's almost hiding the mastaba behind. And the guy was gaining like self-confidence. He was trying and making mistakes and learning. So he decided to enlarge, to add more mastabas to be higher, so they can see it over the distance from behind the enclosure wall without getting in. So to add another step on top of the first one, he had to have an extension to the mastaba, enlarging this mastaba, and made it bigger so it could fit another one on top. The other one on top was also 10 meters high, but was smaller in size. Okay, bless you. So far he had nothing in mind about pyramids. He's still focusing on mastabas. He's adding another mastaba to the first one. So that's the original plan, as you can see. Right, now he has a second mastaba. And then he got more confidence, and he decided to go for 2 more steps. The second one and the third one and the fourth one. So that was the old original plan after changing from mastaba to a pyramid shape. Oh, I'm doing great. So why not making it even bigger? Yeah. So he had extensions to each one of those mastabas, as you can see the yellow extension here, to make it much, much bigger than before. Ended up by having 6 steps. Each one of them is 10 meters high. So total height of that step mastaba or step pyramid is 60 meters in height. Okay, we cannot call it a pyramid. It's wrong what's written here. But we're using the word pyramid because it's well known. Yeah. But we should call it actually step mastaba. So when you meet somebody and would like to tell them about the lecture or your trip to Egypt, whatever, I always tell my groups in Egypt this: when you go home, tell your friends that the Egyptian civilization started step by step. Yeah, makes sense? So, I mean, when you read a book about the pyramids and the magical power of the pyramids, and aliens came here and built pyramids and stuff like this, don't believe it, because this is how it starts from scratch. They were building like very simple primitive tombs of mastabas, and they changed the material, and then they made the mastaba bigger. They added another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then they got the form of the pyramid later on. So this is the plan, as you can see from inside. By the way, the step pyramid or the step mastaba is suffering a lot from natural causes, and it is strongly threatened. The site is closed. I mean, inside the pyramid, you cannot go inside the pyramid, and they are now covering it from outside with new blocks of limestone, trying to protect it as much as it could. Because, I mean, the quality of stone, it's the first time to use limestone in history of mankind, like 4,700 years ago. So they couldn't actually choose the best quality of stone. So it's very poor quality. That's why it's falling apart at the moment. So here we have another plan of the Pyramid 1 and Pyramid 2, and that's the shaft and the burial chamber, very much like the other mastabas, but it's bigger in size. That's a real picture of the extension. Here you can see that's the first mastaba, or the first level, and here you can see the extension of the first one to fit the other two. You can see how poor the stone is. Yeah, it's very poor actually, not like the Giza one. Giza is definitely a better quality. And here is like a picture of the whole area of the grand or the great court. Well, ladies and gentlemen, because religion was a very important thing in ancient Egypt, we don't expect the king to build this beautiful, magnificent, great complex just to be his house of eternity. It has to be used also for his daily life. So that complex of King Zoser was used for some religious festivals and some political festivals. I always get these questions when people come to Egypt and ask these questions, because you read about Egypt and sometimes you get the wrong source, and they come and tell me, we've heard that the Egyptians used to bury their servants alive with them so they can serve the king in the afterlife. No, that's wrong. It happened in other parts of Africa, but never in Egypt. And we have in the Egyptian Museum great collection of little statues made for their servants, because they believed in the king as a god king. So when he comes back to the afterlife, he can point out those little statues and make them real, so they can come as servants in the afterlife and serve him again. So there is no need to bury servants alive. Okay. Another thing is, we've heard that they used to kill the tomb builders after they finish building a tomb, so they can keep it as a secret. Wrong. And we have also very good evidence of the builders of the pyramids and their villages, and the builders of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings and their villages. Okay, one more thing that people get it wrong about Egypt is that we've heard that they used to kill the king after 30 years from coming to the throne. No, wrong. It happened in other parts of Africa, but not in Egypt. It was common for the tribal life, when they have a chief of a tribe for 30 years, they must kill him in a big festival. He knows that. He knows that he's going to be killed in that festival if he lives for 30 years as the chief of the tribe. Okay, tribal life, they need someone strong to lead his people, and also to fight the other tribes and to lead them hunting and to protect them and so on. So as he's getting old, he cannot do this. And it seems that the community couldn't accept the fact that this guy will resign and sit quietly until he dies. No, we kill him. So attending this festival would be his successor, could be his son, could be younger brother, could be his cousin, could be whoever in the tribe. And when they attend that festival, killing the old chief, so the wisdom of his soul will be transferred to the body, the young body of his successor. That happened in Africa, but not in Egypt. But Egypt is part of Africa, so definitely it was influenced by the African traditional life. So the pharaohs, after 30 years from being pharaohs, they had to have a festival, a political festival, let's call it re-election. The king is inviting all the representatives of the different provinces. And I will always say that the Americans would understand this more than any other nation. Because before the American election, you have the candidates traveling all over the states. And they meet people and so on, tell them about their program and what they promise and so on. So the same thing. The king, the pharaoh, was inviting the governors, the mayors, the high priests, and the elite of the society here and there, inviting them all to a big festival so he can show them that he's still young, he's still strong, he's still able to lead the nation for another 30 years. So come on guys, elect me for another 30 years. Yeah? So that open court, that great court, was mainly used for that particular festival. So here, this red arrow is showing where the audience were sitting, watching the king performing. So the four corners, the king would go, one of the rituals, that the king would go to each corner, he will go here first, and then being crowned, and then running to the next one, being crowned again, and then here and there, 4 times, the 4 corners of universe. So he is elected not as just the king of Egypt, but the king of the universe. And at that time, Egypt meant to them the whole planet. They never expected somebody else living on this planet. It was only Egypt and the Egyptians. They only realized that there are some other people when Egypt was invaded by the Hyksos. Only then. But before that, nobody lives, it's only us. Yeah? So we don't know anything about anybody else. We care about Egypt, so the king was elected as the king of the universe or the whole planet Earth. Okay, we noticed before we leave this slide, we notice here that the south tomb, here, we found or discovered a shaft, and it is 27 meters deep, as deep as the shaft underneath the pyramid. And it was a big question mark. Why do we have 2 shafts? We remember now that King Zoser was the first king to build his tomb in the north, because his ancestors built their tombs in the south. So he was the first one to move his tomb to the north, and he was worried about losing the supporters, claiming that he is now more loyal to the north or to Lower Egypt. So he built like 2 tombs. One tomb here under the pyramid, which is the northern tomb, and this south tomb or the southern tomb, to like make everybody happy. Yeah? Right. What to put in the 2 tombs? We have 2 main things, as important as each other's: the body and the canopic jars. What are the canopic jars? The alabaster jars, like among the collection of Tutankhamun, and they are containing the internal organs of the king. When they do the mummification, they take everything out of the body, leave only the heart, which is very important for weighing the heart and the feather, for knowing if he was good or bad. And they take all the organs like livers, kidneys, and so on, and they put them in those jars. So those are could be more important than the body. So Carter, when he discovered Tutankhamun, was really annoyed because he couldn't find them. He found the mummy, he found gold, he found the golden mask, he found jewelry. So where are the canopic jars? He was not satisfied until he found them in a side chamber. Okay, so we strongly believe that he used one of the shafts for the mummy and the other shaft for the canopic jars. Okay. We get back now to the entrance, and we're still talking about the first building of stone ever. So definitely they had very strong influence from the time before when they were building of mud, brick, and wood. So the entrance is very narrow to control the number of visitors and the quality of the visitors as well. Not everyone was invited. When you go through this little door, I'll take you minute by minute inside now. So if you go through this one and look at the ceiling of that little tiny corridor, that's the ceiling here. Yeah, it looks like a wooden ceiling, because before building of stone, they were building of mud brick, and the ceiling was wooden ceiling, made of logs, wooden logs. Yeah, but this one actually is built of stone. This is limestone, and it's formed in the same shape of logs, because this is what they know. Yeah, this is how it looks like. So they had no other plans or no other designs. So they formed the stone to look very much like blocks. Amazing. It's really amazing. When you see it for real, it's beautiful. After this little corridor, you get to a beautiful, great colonnade. Okay. So the columns, as you can see, are built here on both sides. But because it was the first time to build columns of stone, he also was inspired by making the columns of papyrus reeds. So it looks like bundles of papyrus reeds put together. It's made of stone. Yeah? And he was not sure about how strong the columns are. Will they support the ceiling, or they will be weak and the building will collapse? As he was not sure, he decided to attach each one of the columns to the wall behind by building a little wall here. Yeah? Doing so, he created niches. You got it? Can you imagine it? Yeah? So he built the colonnade first, and he attached each one of the columns to the wall behind. So created like niches. And he managed to make the number of those niches to be 42. Why 42? What is the significance of 42? 42 is the exact number of counties, provinces, nomes, states, call it whatever you like, yeah, of Egypt. In the ancient time, not now. In the ancient time, Egypt was divided into 42 nomes. And each one of them had a local god. Right? So Amun, for example, was the god of Luxor. So what they do, he was very clever. He will bring statues of the local gods and place each one in one of those shrines. Okay, so when the king is walking by the colonnade, he is welcomed by the statues of the gods as if they are showing their loyalty to him and encouraging him to be re-elected, saying that we are supporting you, we are with you, yeah, we give you our votes, don't worry. And at the same time, he's showing respect to all the gods and greeting them before he goes to the great court for the festival or for the political festival. So this is like two examples, the ceiling and the columns, how they were shaped to be very much similar to the time before building of stone. We've seen the plan of the mastaba. I just want to show you also a real mastaba. Yeah? Building the step mastaba was about 2700 BC. Okay. It took about 100 years until 2600 BC when the ancient Egyptians managed to build the first full, complete pyramid. Okay? They had to work hard, they had to try, they had to make mistakes and learn from mistakes. So this is an example of just a single mastaba. The guy was not that advanced to build something more than this, so it's just a mastaba. Okay. That's a full pyramid. That's the plan of the full pyramid. 2600 BC, upon the throne of Egypt was king called Huni, and Huni was the last king of the third dynasty, which was founded by Zoser. Huni had no sons, so one of the high officials, Senefru, got married to his daughter. And Huni was building his tomb or his pyramid as a step pyramid, but the steps were much bigger than those of Saqqara in Maydum. So as you can see, that's a big step, and then a smaller step, and then a smaller step. So that's what we call the pyramid of Maydum by King Huni. Huni died, his pyramid was unfinished. So King Senefru, his son-in-law, decided to complete his pyramid, the pyramid of his father-in-law, showing gratuity for making him the pharaoh, because if he hasn't got married to his daughter, then he wouldn't be the pharaoh of Egypt. Yeah? So he finished the building of Maydum, but it seems not to the very end, because he was busy and concerned about building his own. So he went north of Maydum to a place called Dahshur, which is quite close to Saqqara and Giza, and he started building his own pyramid. Now I want you to look at this part of the pyramid, and back to the other slide, this one. So still the same plan, one big step. When they were building this one, they made a mistake with the angle, because the angle was 54 degrees. And they realized that they will never finish it, because they will have to keep going up until they close the building. So they halfway through they had to change the angle to make it nearly 45 degrees. So it looks like a pyramid, as you can see. He didn't like it. So he is learning now. He got the right angle. So he moved 2 kilometers south, like less than a mile, and started building his complete pyramid, the correct one. This pyramid, ladies and gentlemen, looks very much like Giza. Yeah? But actually it's called the Red Pyramid, and officially it is the first real pyramid on earth. Yeah, not Giza. Okay, what is the connection between this guy and the guys of Giza? This one, Senefru, the builder of the 2 pyramids of Dahshur, and the one who completed the one of his father-in-law, so he built like 3 pyramids within his lifetime, gained experience, was the father of Khufu, Cheops, the builder of the greatest pyramid of Giza. That one of the son of the other one. So the son Khufu, or Cheops, when he came to the throne, he inherited a very well trained, talented team of architects and engineers who learned a lot over the last couple of decades, and allowed him to build the most sophisticated pyramids in ancient Egypt until now, the most advanced. Dimensions of the pyramid, very briefly, I don't like to talk numbers, but just to imagine what I'm talking about. The height of the pyramid to the top is 146 meters, 146 meters, and it has 4 sides, so each side is 230 meters long. The estimated number of the blocks of limestone used in building that pyramid is 2,300,000 blocks of limestone. 2,300,000 blocks of limestone, weighing average of 2.5 ton each. 2.5. At the base, they were much bigger blocks, average of 15 ton. Towards the top, they are smaller ones, so the smallest was 1 ton. If you calculate the average for that number, it will be 2.5 ton. It took about 22 to 24 years till the building was completed. And the description was given by the early Greek traveler, early Greek historian Herodotus, who mentioned that 100,000 people were involved in building that great pyramid. He visited Egypt about 500 BC. We're not sure about the number, but it gives us a very good idea. People always admire and ask, how did they manage to cut the blocks? How did they manage to move the blocks? How did they manage to bring them up? How did they manage to design? But you always forget to ask something very important, which is, how did they manage 100,000 people working in that part of the desert, and everyone getting up in the morning knowing exactly what he's supposed to do? It's people management, which is one of the most difficult things we talk about nowadays in the 21st century. Imagine if you're running a company with 100,000 people working for you. So even with the technology like emails and fax and cell phones and all this stuff, it's very difficult to communicate with them. So imagine talking about that large number of workers and where to accommodate them, how to feed them, what sort of kitchen we're talking about, what sort of catering we're talking about. We don't expect these guys to work in halfway during the day. They have like a lunch hour and go to McDonald's and order something to eat. Yeah, definitely not. So they need like a logistic staff to provide them with food, not just food, medical care. Talking about a working site, 100,000, dealing with blocks of stones, moving. Imagine the accidents, imagine the death rate, imagine plagues, imagine disease, imagine whatever. So how did they manage all this? Question, have they used slaves in building the pyramids? The answer, definitely no. Think about it. If they used slaves, 100,000 slaves, working in this open area, you need guards to look after the slaves and guard them. So how many thousands do you need of guards to guard and control 100,000 of this big crowd, yeah, who are willing to sacrifice their own life just to run away? They will give it a try. If we can make it, we can make it. If not, we done. Yeah, we are slaves. We don't have a life. So if we just give it a try, like prisoners when they run away from prisons, the same concept, they might get shot and die. Anyway, the pyramid, ladies and gentlemen, was built with love, because we have to understand the mentality of the Egyptians, not nowadays, thousands of years ago, when they worshipped the king. Not worship the king as a god, because it might be a bit difficult to understand this, but they had a great respect to the king, and they believed that the king was their link to the gods. The king was the one recognizing them for the afterlife, bringing them back to the afterlife, telling the gods that these guys were good guys. So imagine a great honor to be working among the team, building something for your god king. Yeah? What a great honor. I always give this example. It's just an example. It hasn't happened to me, but imagine I'm a freelance working in Egypt and I got an email from Queen Elizabeth and said that I'm coming to Egypt, I've heard about you and I would like you to be my guide. Wow, what a great honor. Queen Elizabeth is not a goddess. Queen Elizabeth is not my queen, but she's a very famous figurehead. So it's a great honor to choose me. It means that damn good. Yeah. So I'll be honored to show everyone. Well, guys, you see, Queen Elizabeth is coming to Egypt, and she asked me personally to be her guide. What a great honor! The same thing happened in ancient Egypt on a bigger scale. I am one of the artists. I am one of the builders who was chosen to be among the team building the tomb for the Pharaoh. I am among the people who will be first recognized by the king in the afterlife. So you have to understand this to understand how the work was done. Early 20th century, when we thought about theories how they built the pyramids, we thought of forming a ram of sand on one side, getting the stone and so on, but we calculated how long the ram would be to go up to 146 meters, and it should be like 8 kilometers long. It's a long way. So do you realize that? No, definitely it doesn't work. So now they developed this theory, and they said that they had 4 ramps on 4 sides. It's like going in a circle, going higher and higher from level to another. And they were building from bottom to top. And when they finish, the whole building will be covered in sand. So they had to remove the sand from top to bottom this time. And they were very clever, because while they're removing the sand, going down this time, they were covering the pyramids from outside with a finer quality of limestone. The fine casing of the pyramid, cover it from top to bottom. It's a shame that most of it is gone, but we can see on the top of the second pyramid we have still a small part of it survived. So that's the casing of the pyramid, and it was made of a better quality of limestone. The limestone for building the pyramids came from local area, not far from the Sphinx, but while this better one covering the outside brought from the eastern desert, from across the river Nile. So it was a long way, but they had to do this because it's a better quality. And then now you can understand that after 100 years, they were learning how to choose what is the best quality, what can they do for building, what can they do for decoration, and so on. Back to the Great Pyramid, because as I said, this is the most sophisticated, and there are lots of rumors about it, lots of studies and stuff like this. When the inside of the pyramid was discovered by Giovanni Belzoni. Giovanni Belzoni was an Italian traveler, and he was quite lucky because he discovered the inside of the pyramid, and he discovered also Abu Simbel. So, shame to say that he carved his name, Giovanni Belzoni, inside the burial chamber and inside Abu Simbel. But anyway, that might give us an idea about the plan. That's the entrance here. And we notice that there is a corridor going down. Yeah, this corridor here is going down to the original burial chamber, which is underground. Okay? So you see, what you see here is a very good example of how they were learning, how they were developing their knowledge. Yeah? So when they built the pyramid at the beginning, they had the normal shaft underneath. But halfway through the buildings, they realized that it is much better if they can move the burial chamber to be above ground, inside the pyramid itself. So they built this one here, which is known now as the Queen's Chamber. The Queen's Chamber. Why? Because by a mistake we thought that because we have two tombs or two burial chambers inside the pyramid, so one of them was for the Queen. But that's wrong, because we discovered the pyramids for the queens next to the pyramid of the king later on. But still known as the Queen's Chamber. And then more studies led them to the fact that it is even better if they move it higher up towards the center. So they built the King's Chamber. This one here, right in the center. Okay. And because they were expecting heavy weight of the stone on that empty space of the burial chamber, so they were very clever. They formed those 5 levels of small chambers to reduce the pressure on the ceiling or the roof of the burial chamber. Amazing. Inside. So that's a corridor going up, and this is what we call Grand Gallery, yeah, and leading at the end to the King's Chamber or the main burial chamber. And those are like air shafts. Maybe you read something about the air shafts, that over the last 10-15 years, group of Egyptologists, they designed little robot. It's a German one actually, and they send it into that air shaft and trying to discover things, and then they found that blocking the way is a little door, and they had to design a small robot to go up from underneath the door, and they found another door that's through the air shaft. It's amazing, but we are afraid to move even one block from inside because we don't know the structure of the pyramid. We might cause the collapse of the whole building, so leave it as it is. And maybe you can see some programs on television, Discovery Channel or History Channel, whatever, and you see our head of antiquities, Professor Zay Hawass, with the cowboy hat, is always on TV. He was the one in charge of the pyramid site, and now he's the head of the Department of Antiquities. So he's involved in such these things that I don't really agree with him most of the time, because I think it causes damage to the monuments, like the scanning the mummy of Tutankhamun. Well, we know that he was the son of Akhenaten now. It's not a great deal, but it definitely caused damage to the mummy, which was in a very poor condition. So I think was not that important. When they were building the pyramids, ladies and gentlemen, I can spend the rest of my life talking about the pyramids of Giza, but I'm just trying to make it short and sweet, and we have lots of things to talk about as well. When they were building the pyramids like Giza, they had no time to decorate them from inside. And we expect a massive building like this, take about like 25 years. You have no time to decorate it from inside. But later on, about like 300, 400 years later, we're talking about like 2300 BC, 2200 BC, towards the fall of the empire of the Old Kingdom, when kings became very weak and not great kings like Cheops or Chephren or Mykerinos, the builders of the 3 pyramids of Giza. They were building very, very poor pyramids. That's a pyramid of Unas, one of the kings of the 5th dynasty, and it looks like this from outside. It's very poor, but Unas is quite unique. Why? Because it was the very first pyramid with the burial chamber decorated. So they started the decoration. Well, they didn't spend much time or effort in building outside, but they spent most of the time decorating inside. That's an example, and I have another example here. That's another pyramid, believe it or not. That's the outside. It looks like a sand dune or something like this. And the inside, look at the inside. So it's amazing. Yeah. So each one of those pyramids has its own speciality. Either it's beautiful from outside or beautiful from inside. We're talking about the 6th dynasty. King Teti is the 6th dynasty, which is towards the end of the Old Kingdom. After the fall of the Old Kingdom, we had what we call the Dark Period, the first intermediate period, when was like a chaos and was disrespect to the royal families, and everything was upside down, and many of the tombs, if not even all of them, being robbed. So the treasures of the great pharaohs being stolen by thieves, and they believe that this is why they should change the building from leaving a big pyramid as a landmark. They should hide the pyramids, or they should hide the tombs. So they changed to build. That's the Middle Kingdom. After the first intermediate period, they had the Middle Kingdom, and they built. They were cutting the mountains and forming tombs, so they can hide the entrance, and that's it. So they can use actually the shape of the mountain as a pyramid, and they decorate the tombs from inside. So this is how it looks from outside, and this is from inside. It's even much better than the decoration of the pyramid. So this is an example from the Middle Kingdom, and it told us a lot about their daily life as well. Then after that, they built the tombs also as rock-cut tombs in the New Kingdom, the Valley of the Kings, and here you can see example of the colors. Those who are going to Egypt soon, inshallah, you will enjoy these beautiful colors. We still have these colors in the Valley of the Kings, not just pictures. These are real colors in the Valley of the Kings and also in the Valley of the Queens. So they spend most of the time decorating inside. And the Valley of the Kings, the tombs were built of or cut out of the limestone mountain. So if we talk about pyramids, which is very important, temples, which is very important. When they were building the pyramids at Giza, they were building temples as well. And this temple is one of the very early temples in Egypt. And just to remember this, that's the Valley Temple. The Valley Temple of what? The Valley Temple of the 2nd Pyramid of Giza, which is located next door to the Sphinx. Yeah? Next door to the Sphinx. Each one of the pyramids we have in Egypt was a complex. The pyramid, a mortuary temple, a valley temple, and a causeway between the two temples. The valley temple for mummification. So they take the body to be mummified in the valley temple, and then they carry the mummy into the causeway until they reach the mortuary temple for the lost offerings and lost rituals like burning incense and so on, and then they take it inside the pyramid. So each pyramid should be part of a complex of 4 elements, two temples, one pyramid and one causeway. So that was the Valley Temple of King Chifrin, Ra, which was built of limestone, and the decoration was very plain, that they covered the inside and outside with blocks of granite. Okay, so that's the plan of the Valley Temple, which is about 4,600 years old. Very simple. That's the entrance, and that's the sanctuary, yeah? And we see the courtyard, which is what we have here. Okay. Then we move to something much more sophisticated, which is Karnak. Karnak, by the way, is the largest ancient monument of the ancient civilization of mankind. Karnak. Amazing. Karnak should be definitely one of the wonders of the world. Actually, only one section of Karnak could make it very well to be one of the wonders of the world, not the whole of Karnak, only the great hypostyle hall, the hall of columns, this one here. So look at the plan. I want you to go back to this one. Look at very easy, simple plan, and then moving to a very sophisticated one with the lake. That's the sacred lake. That's Karnak, and that's the way down to the temple of Luxor. Yeah? When we talk about festivals in Egypt, we'll talk thoroughly about this because it was one of the most famous festivals. Those are pylons, and they were built of stone. Everything is built of stone. They were forming like entrances and facade of the temple. They were always building from inside out. When they were building temples, they were always building from inside out. So they come to the innermost section, which is the sanctuary, and they built it first. Then they carry on adding sections. Building tombs or pyramids even was like individual work. It's just for one king. So if the king is dead and the project is not finished yet, then they have to use it unfinished. This is why many of the tombs, either in the Valley of the Kings, the Middle Kingdom, or wherever, were left unfinished. But when we talk about temples, the temples were the houses of God, so they were like national projects. No matter who was upon the throne, maybe I start the project and then I die, then my successor, whoever the successor was, son, grandson, or cousin, or even someone else, would have the great honor to carry on the project, because he's not building for me, he's building for his God, to have the honor to have his name written somewhere in the temple or the house of God. So that's just an idea about Karnak, and I have some pictures for the inside of the great hypostyle hall. Karnak is very different from the other temples. Each one of the temples had a hypostyle hall, or a hall of columns, where the columns are supporting the ceiling. But Karnak is very different, because can you imagine the size of the columns here? And those are windows to allow beams of light, because it was roofed, so it was dark. So they designed those windows here to allow beams of light, so they can use reflection on polished metals for the lights, so they can illuminate inside. The number of columns here is 134. 134 columns. The second largest temple in Egypt after Karnak got 36 columns. So you see the difference? 36, and it's big enough. Yeah? And Karnak is 134. So the great hypostyle hall, which is only one part of Karnak, could make it as one of the wonders of the world easily. Easily. Yeah? That's the main entrance. This is the pylon, what I told you about, the entrance, and like the main entrance in between the two towers. This is the avenue of the Sphinx. Yeah? We have two avenues of Sphinx in Luxor. This is one of them, and the statues got like ram heads, because they were dedicated to the ram-headed god Amun-Ra. That's like a picture from an aeroplane for the site. It's not a satellite image, because that's an old one. And it shows here that that red one is the old part of Karnak, which is dated back to the Middle Kingdom, when the god Amun was just the local god. And the rest, all what's stretching here, and even the lake, all this is new kingdom. So it started here, and then we carried on after that. Later, after Pharaonic Egypt and the Greeks came to Egypt, they were Ptolemies and the Roman emperors were very influenced by the Egyptian history and religion, and they realized that religion was the most important subject, and they said that it's the best way to gain the Egyptians to our side. That was like the advice of Alexander the Great. Very smart guy, realized that we cannot actually fight the Egyptian religion. They are very strong, the priests are very strong, so better to gain them to our side. So make them happy. He made himself the son of the god, Amun-Ra, and he started building temples, visiting and so on. So he died very young, and then all his successors did the same thing. So what we call Edfu is a Greco-Roman temple. Right, that's different from Pharaonic temple. Greco-Roman temple is much later. Yeah, so we're talking about like 2,000 years old. Started about like 300, 200 BC, building what is known as Greco-Roman temple. But there is a very important thing we need to know about the Greco-Roman temples. Although they are called Greco-Roman temples, they were built by Egyptians. The builders were Egyptians, materials were Egyptian, the engineers and architects, the priests were Egyptian, the gods worshipped in those temples were Egyptian. The only difference that the king who was upon the throne was Greek or Roman. That's it. That's why we call it Greco-Roman temple. Right? So Edfu is the best example of a complete temple. It's the most well-preserved temple in Egypt. Not the most ancient, not the largest, but it's the most well-preserved temple in Egypt. And here you can see the plan. That might give us a very good idea about the plan. The entrance, then an open court, and the open court was mainly for making the offerings. So they enter here, and then they make the offerings. They offer everything: food, drinks, animals, birds, gold, silver, whatever. They never had human sacrificial. And then after they finish, they go into the hypostyle hall. Look at the size of the hypostyle hall comparing to the one of Karnak. This one got only 18 columns, yeah, and it's big. It's big. And the temple is getting smaller, the second hypostyle hall. The ceiling is lower, the floor is higher. And then leading to an antechambers, vestibules, and then the sanctuary with the holy of holies, this one here in the middle. Now, I want you to imagine with me that this plan would draw a line here, and we draw another line here, so it will look like a pyramid. You got it? That's the top of the pyramid here. Yeah? The top of the pyramid is where they imagine the sun god, the solar disk, and the sides of the pyramids where the sun rays giving protection to the mummy. Here, the top of the pyramid is the sanctuary where we have the statue of the local god doing exactly the same thing like the main god, giving protection to the whole thing here. Okay? So this is the plan of Edfu, and you can see the inside of Edfu. It's a massive temple, and it's beautiful. It's got remains of colors and lots of figures. That's the open court, and that's the entrance. We are now inside the temple, yeah? And you can see the decoration here carved on the stone. Something very important influenced the building of temples, that at the beginning of creation or at the beginning of civilization, they tried to explain creation, how life started on earth. And they said that water was everywhere, it was a great ocean, and something appeared from this water, which was the top of a mountain, the highest mountain. And on the top of the mountain, which is called Ben Ben, it's like a small pyramid, a big bird landed on that mountain and left a big egg. From that egg was the creation of the different creatures. The story is very similar to a story mentioned in the Old Testament and in the Quran about the great flood and the ark. And it's amazing when you know that the name of the god of water was Noon. Noon, similar to Noah. Very similar. And the story is very similar. So that egg was the ark. Right. So when they built the temples, they surrounded the temples by an enclosure wall. You see this mud brick wall, an enclosure wall. And when they designed this wall, it was formed like waves. You cannot see it here because this is badly ruined, but the original plan would be like waves. The enclosure wall forming the ocean. Yeah? And the temple itself is rising from the ocean. Everything in ancient Egypt had a meaning. Yeah? Everything had an explanation. So the temple itself is the Ben, the beginning of creation. And back again to the hypostyle hall, they were forming the marshes of the delta, the papyrus and the lotus, and this is where the life started on earth as they believed. So it's representation of life. So this is, ladies and gentlemen, an idea about the evolution of construction and how they developed building tombs and developed building temples and how they managed to change the material used and the ideas were developed. Of course, when we come to talk about Greco-Roman Egypt, it's towards the end of the civilization. It's getting weaker and weaker. The Greeks were following the steps of the Egyptians, but the Romans didn't do the same thing. The Romans were dealing with Egypt as another part of the Roman Empire, and it was like the granary of Rome, and they treated the Egyptians like slaves, badly treated, and collecting tax and suffering a lot and so on. So lots of uprising and revolutions and bloodshed and so on. So it was not the best time. And then Christianity was introduced, then changed the mentality, became a Christian country and then an Islamic country. So all these monuments were neglected over the years. And the problem was that most of them were built along the River Nile. And when they were used in ancient Egypt, they used to protect them from the Nile by building coffer dams in front of the site and also digging irrigation canals to take the water away from the site. Just in case if the water damaged part of the temple or whatever, they can restore it after the flood season. But when the religion changed to Christianity and later to Islam, nobody cared about looking after these monuments. I mean, there was not a concept of ancient history or monuments or whatever, it's all buildings. So they were left to be flooded and it was silting up. So many of the temples were covered under silt after many years. So in the 19th century and the 20th century, most of the sites were discovered by digging the silt up and clearing the whole area. So it took many years to do so, and we still believe that there are many things still buried underneath. Yeah? So as usual, I say that maybe if you have any questions about this topic, I'm glad to get your questions. Do you have any question?
I have one. I wasn't here last night, so I'm not sure if you've answered this, but is the Sphinx a mastaba?
Well, the Sphinx is not a mastaba. The Sphinx is one piece of stone, and actually it was very clever to have that statue, the form of the Sphinx, because when they finished building the first pyramid of Khufu, they were using that area where the Sphinx is as the quarry. And then his son came later and he was building his pyramid next door to his father. And where the Sphinx is, where was the leftover of the limestone quarry for his father, was supposed to be the Valley Temple. This one I told you about. This Valley Temple here, it's located next door to the Sphinx. So it's part of the complex. And he thought that if he would leave that ugly piece of stone there, it would spoil the whole image. So they thought of forming something out of it, and they couldn't find anything better than the Sphinx. What is the meaning of the Sphinx? The Sphinx is a figure used in ancient Egypt for one of the main gods, the sun god. His name was Ra-Horakhti. Ra, the sun god. Horus, the falcon. Akhti means horizon. So it's a unification of Ra and Horus in the horizon. The form of the statue is human head for the intelligence of the human being, which is the same features of Chephren, Khafra, the builder of the second pyramid, and the body of a lion for the power of the animal. So that's the original figure of the Sphinx. They discovered recently corridors and passages underneath the Sphinx. Nothing was found inside, they were empty so far, but they're expecting to discover something definitely in those subterranean corridors. It was common to have things like this underneath most of the buildings and temples and so on for storing equipment, storing jewelry, expensive stuff, and some secret documents. So maybe we find something in the near future. But again, we are facing a serious problem with the quality of the stone, because it was eroded over the years, and actually not only us in the modern time did the restoration of the statue, but one of the early pharaohs, about 1400 BC, left us piece of granite carving his story that he came hunting in the area when he was a crown prince, and the statue was covered up to the neck in sand, and he had a dream that the god Ra-Horakhti came and told him that if you remove the sand and restore my statue, I'll make you the pharaoh of Egypt. So even in the ancient time, the statue was suffering a lot from natural causes, sandstorms and water erosion and so on. So they are doing the same thing like at Saqqara with the same pyramid. They're covering it from outside with new blocks of limestone. So it's not a mastaba because it was not used for burial or anything like this. Thank you for mentioning this. Right, so I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that you've enjoyed my little lecture, and I hope that it gave you a good idea about construction in Egypt. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Hisham.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you.
If you would like to join us down there where you first came in and have a cookie or a glass of wine, and even continue conversation with Hisham, I'm sure you would welcome that.
Yeah, of course.
And thank you for coming, everybody.
By the way, if you would like to know about tomorrow's lecture, if you are interested and would like to come tomorrow, tomorrow is about festivals in Egypt and their roots in ancient Egypt. How festivals were nowadays, we celebrate nowadays, are linked to festivals in ancient Egypt, which is, it's not religion because we're going to have another session about religion later on, but tomorrow is mainly festivals in Egypt and how they are related to ancient Egypt. So I hope that you enjoy it as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.